In my insect-friendly garden, I have recorded 37 species of butterflies, of which 28 species have bred. As well as butterflies, I have also recorded 51 species of hoverflies, 49 species of solitary bees, 8 species of bumblebees, 7 species of solitary wasps, and around 10 species of dragonflies and damselflies. So how was this achieved? Well, the biggest single contribution comes from the wildflower meadows that contain at least 120 different species of wildflowers. The garden also has many flowering hedgerow shrubs, many flowering garden shrubs, and several trees, including oak and Scots pine. A medium-sized pond also plays its part, as it provides clean, chemical-free water for breeding dragonflies, damselflies, and many species of hoverflies that lay their eggs at the edges of the pond. So where is my garden? Where do I live? My house is situated on the outskirts of Storrington in West Sussex, and from the back garden I can see Kithurst Hill and Chantry Hill, both of which are well-known butterfly sites. So this is a view of my back garden, and as you can see, there is a scruffy lawn courtesy of No Mow May. You can also see some meadows there, a back hedge, and then in the middle of the screen there's a line of oak trees which is part of a copse about 200 meters to the south of my hedge. And in the background you can see the South Downs. On the left of the screen, there is Chantry Hill, which is the grassy slope, and on the right of the screen is Kithurst Hill. So they're both quite close, 2 to 3 kilometers away. This is another photograph of the meadows, more of a close-up. And this is a close-up in... I'm just going to try and get rid of this toolbar at the top here, which is annoying me. There we are. Oh, that's slightly better. This is a close-up of the meadow in mid-June. The flower in the middle is Viper's bugloss, which is not actually that great for butterflies, but is right. Now, that doesn't want to work, so let's try it. Right, I've frozen. Let me just right, okay. I'm using my keyboard, and unfortunately I'm frozen, so I'm going to have to use my mouse. This slide was taken, this photograph was taken in June, and although it shows a photograph of a small blue, I've included it to show the abundance of flowers in the meadow. In this case, it's bird's foot trefoil. Another photograph, again showing a small blue, and this is in mid-June, and marjoram is the dominant flower in this photograph. And by early September, Devil's Bit scabious is the dominant flower, and it gives you a bit of an idea of the the huge number of flower heads in the meadow, and I think that is largely responsible for all the insects that are attracted to the garden. So I have around about 120 wildflowers, and over the past 5 years I have undertaken a 5-year study, tried to photograph as many butterflies as possible nectaring on wildflowers, and so far I have 57 different wildflower species, which are the top providers. So the list that you can see, 13 are native species, 2 are non-native. The non-native are Verbena bonariensis and Buddleia. So top of the list, if you were to introduce just one wildflower into your garden, the one that would be most attractive to your local butterflies is field scabious with 21 butterfly species. That is followed by Verbena bonariensis with 16 species, And then Devil's Bit scabious and Hempegrimini, 15 species. Burstfoot trefoil, oxeye daisy, 11 species. Bethany, Buddleia, Dame's violet, greater knapweed, marjoram, yarrow, all with 9 species. Meadow vetchling and common fleabane, 6 species. And red campion, 5 species. So in my opinion, if you were starting from scratch and you wanted to provide for your local butterflies, that is the list that I would use. I like to attract butterflies into the garden, but I also like to encourage them to breed. And the easiest way to encourage breeding butterflies is to have a wildflower meadow. So I have 15 butterfly species breed in my garden meadows, and they include the meadow skippers, brown butterflies, blue butterflies, and small copper. I have created different sward heights to encourage as much diversity as possible. And on the west side of the garden, I have a bank of common nettles, and of course that encourages breeding for peacock, red admiral, small tortoiseshell, and comma. So let's look at some butterflies. So green hairstreak on burstfoot trefoil. I do have the occasional territorial male, but most of the green hairstreaks I see in the garden are in the meadow. Most of them are female, and they feed for a bit, and then they start laying eggs, again on burstfoot trefoil. Large skipper nectaring on greater knapweed. Last year was memorable. I had a sighting of a male large skipper on the 17th of May. Not only was that the first in Sussex for the year, but it turned out to be a national first. And I've never achieved that before, so that's the first time. A slightly unusual photograph of a large skipper on corn cockle. Ringlet on field scabious. Ringlet on devil's bit scabious. I have a small colony of ringlets. The tall hedge at the back of the garden provides shelter and shade, something which this species enjoys. I chose this photograph not so much for the butterfly, but to show off the beauty of field scabious, because it really is a gorgeous flower and worthy of planting in any garden. So this is the green-veined white. There's another one, this time on the Verbena bonariensis. And of course, mating pair. I would regard my garden as being hot and dry, and green-veined whites generally prefer a damper place. So it's not a common butterfly in my garden, but I do see a few. Hummingbird hawk moth on Verbena bonariensis. Last year, certainly in Sussex, we had a very good year, and I must have recorded them on at least 20 days. They also breed in the garden. They breed on ladies' bed straw, and whilst I have hedge bed straw, they seem to ignore it. But I regularly see them lay eggs on ladies' bed straw. Female orange tip on greater stitchwort, very welcome in the spring. Egg laying on Dame's violet. Dame's violet, if you're not familiar with it, it's a bit like honesty, and it provides lots of nectar in May and June, or sometimes late April. And also it's a larval food plant, not only for orange tip, but for small white, large white, and green-veined white. So if you don't have cabbages in your garden or other brassicas, it's worthwhile thinking about Dame's violet, because not only does it provide lots of nectar, but it also provides lots of caterpillar food. Female holly blue on Greater Celandine. Unfortunately, I disturbed this butterfly, not deliberately, and you can see it's still got crumpled veins, so it's not the wings have not been fully infused with blood. So it just flew a few feet and started feeding on Greater Celandine. I do believe that the greater variety of flowers you have in your garden, the more likely is it that something that will enjoy feeding. And egg laying. So you can see the egg at the bottom here. So this one is on dogwood. So my first brood in lay eggs on holly and Portuguese laurel. A lot of eggs are laid on Portuguese laurel. It's a female large white on Greater Knapweed. An amazing pair. Brown Argus, one of my favourite butterflies. When I first developed the wildflower meadows between 2005 and 2008, I think, from memory, I think probably common blue was the first one to colonise the meadow, but interestingly, brown Argus was the second. On the local downs, common rock rose is its usual liable food plant, but in my garden they use cut-leaved cranespell and probably round-leaved cranespell as well. I included this photograph of brown Argus feeding on marjoram, not so much for the butterfly, but again showing off the beauty of wildflowers. It's a sort of flower that you have to get up close and personal, but when you do, that it's very worthwhile, and it is a gorgeous little plant. And the bumblebees absolutely love it as well. This is an unusual photograph of brown Argus feeding on musk mallow. This is an interesting plant and possibly one for the future. Last year in the heat wave and the drought, the musk mallow just flowered all summer long. They didn't need any water. They didn't mind if the temperature was 35 degrees. They just kept flowering all summer. Male chalk hill blue feeding on marjoram. There's a colony of, well, there's colonies on both Kidhurst Meadow and Chantry Hill, and the occasional one pops down in the garden. Often doesn't stay very long. Might stay for 10 minutes or so, have a feed, and then fly away. And this one feeding on ragwort. And before anyone sends in a message on the chat room that this is a dangerous plant, I think I can cope with 3 or 4 in my garden. And I promise you, I don't have any horses grazing. It's an unusual photograph of a female dingy skipper on a geranium. They do lay eggs in my garden on Burstfoot trefoil, but I wouldn't say that that's commonplace. I quite often have 1 or 2 territorial males, but I don't often see egg laying. Another dingy skipper feeding on Burstfoot trefoil. One of my other favourites, well, I have many favourites, but male Essex skipper on Burstfoot. By the 2nd or 3rd week in July, I hope to have at least 20 skippers in the meadow, about half Essex and the other half small skipper. It's a lovely little butterfly. And a mating pair. This pair are perched on the seed heads of yellow rattle. Long-tailed blue. Well, I've only ever had one, but it was quite late in August, and at the time I didn't have any other blue butterflies in the garden. So as soon as I spotted it, I thought this could be interesting. And sure enough, it was a long-tailed blue. And the interesting thing about it was it only nectared on purple loosestrife. It had the choice of field scabious, devil's foot scabious, but fed on 3 or 4 different plants of purple loosestrife, and then went on its way. So again, it's a reminder to me and everybody else really that the greater variety of plants you have, the more likely are you to attract lots of different insects. This is just another photograph of the same butterfly. As you can see, it's a very tatty specimen. This one's not tatty. It's a lovely male common blue on corn marigold. Corn marigold is an annual, and it comes into flower in mid to late summer. With annuals and biennials, I mentioned Viper's bugloss earlier on, you do have to have bare soil near the parent plants, otherwise you'll lose them. So what I do is I either do some weeding so that there is some bare soil, or it's just an excuse to extend the meadow by another couple of feet, which I do on a fairly regular basis. Another male common blue, this one on red clover. On egg laying, bird's foot trefoil for me is probably the most important plant in your meadow. It's only small, but it provides so much food for both for the adults and for the caterpillars. The usual photograph, this one, small heath feeding on oxeye daisy. The reason it's unusual is because, of course, small heath, like a short sward, an oxeye daisy is associated with tall meadows, so it's unusual to get the two together. But in my garden, I have every height of sward and a good variety of flowers. So this is more like it, a nice small flower, common vetch, another small heath. For those wildflower enthusiasts, one of the easy ways to make sure that it's a common vetch is to look at the leaf, and then you see this spiky bit at the end, and that tells you it's a common vetch. Small heath, this is on Germander speedwell. Germander speedwell grows very well on the sandy soil in my garden, and there are hundreds and hundreds of flower heads, particularly in May. Small tortoiseshell on Damon's violet. I mentioned Damon's violet before. It is very similar to honesty, and I think most people looking at this photograph would probably think it is honesty, but it's a very, very useful plant to have in your garden. This small tortoiseshell on plum blossom, which reminds me just to mention about all fruit trees. The blossom of fruit trees is very important for butterflies, but also solitary bees and other insects. As is the blossom of hawthorn and blackthorn and so on. And if you have room in your garden, it's always worthwhile thinking about having a wild cherry. And if you have a damp area, it's certainly worthwhile thinking about planting goat willow. Caterpillars on the nettle bed. After the years that they've had where they've done so badly, it's rather nice to attract egg-laying small tortoiseshell into your garden. Comma, feeding on the on bramble. The other butterflies that like the bramble flower head in my garden are red admiral and holly blue. And of course, comma love the overripe blackberries late in the summer. And caterpillar damage to hop leaves. So a hop grows in my garden very well. It needs a bit of preparation. It's one of those plants that actually needs a lot of rich compost to get it going, but it grows extremely well. And I'm pretty sure that this is comma. So typically you get these holes in the middle of the leaf. I didn't actually see the caterpillars, but I'm pretty sure that is comma damage. Male small skipper, again on Bird's-foot trefoil. Another one of these plants you do need to get close up to fully appreciate its beauty. And a mating pair of small skippers. These are perched on common yarrow. And egg laying on Yorkshire fog. I've included this just to remind me that we have to be tolerant of grasses. I mean, there are about 10 species of butterfly in my garden that lay their eggs on grass species. And let's face it, folks, I mean, this grass stem is not very pretty. But if we want to encourage species like small skipper, then we have to tolerate it. Or embrace it, for that matter. Marbled whites on greater knapweed. I've mostly included this photograph to show off the beauty of greater knapweed. Greater knapweed is mostly a chalk-loving plant, but and it's very common on the South Downs where I live. But it's also grows very well on sandy soil. And a mating pair. Peak count in my garden is 10 or 12, so they're not uncommon. Wildflowers, but we do have a couple of herbaceous beds, and the two most important plants as far as butterflies are concerned, Michaelmas daisy and buddleia. And the great thing about Michaelmas daisies is that, or this particular species of Michaelmas daisy, is it is in flower the whole of September and most of October, when many other flowers have gone over. And some peacock caterpillars. My toolbar is obscuring everything at the top. I don't know whether it's the same for you. It quite possibly is. So there's two things about this photograph which is slightly unusual. One is the fact that we can see the caterpillars feeding on hop. The eggs were not laid on hop, they were actually laid on nettles, which were close by. And the second thing, which is the 4th of September, so this is these are second generation, which is not that common. Female gatekeeper on yarrow. This happens to be an aberrant. It's got, you see these two black dots, so it's not a standard gatekeeper. Gatekeeper is the commonest butterfly in my garden, so typically I would have a peak daily count of perhaps 35, but I have had in 2019 I counted 60 just walking around the garden, so they can be very numerous. On that particular day when I was counting, so that was early August, 4th of August 2019, I had 140 butterflies in the garden and 20 species. Gatekeeper, this one on marjoram. Gatekeepers, as you know, have very short proboscis, so they're attracted to flowers like yarrow, and in this case, marjoram. And a mating pair. This pair are perched on self-heal, which is a common wildflower in late summer. Small copper on corn marigold. Again, this is I think I've already mentioned this is an annual of late summer. So you need bare soil, otherwise you'll lose it. And a mating pair. There's lots of common sorrel in the garden, so I quite often have 4 or 5 territorial males. It's quite a common butterfly in the garden. Meadow brown on devil's bit scabious. This one is slightly unusual because meadow browns usually have a row of black dots, but this one has none. And a mating pair. These are perched on marjoram. Wool brown on devil's bit scabious. This is for me, it's a hit and miss species. 2 years ago, I had 5 in the garden, all at the same time. Last year, I had none. So I only ever see second brood in August. I've never yet seen a first brood or a third brood in the garden. There's a tiny colony on Chantry Hill, and so this is not a species which is common where I live. So I'm lucky to see one at all. 2 years ago, a male sat in the same spot for 5 days in a row. So when they do find somewhere they like, they will stay. Small white on devil's bit scabious. And a mating pair. Clouded yellow on devil's bit scabious. I see 3 or 4 every summer, sometimes more, but usually about 3 or 4. They don't always stop, but this one was very obliging. The flower head's lovely. I do like the scabious species. And another, well, again, field scabious, I've already talked about that one. So I decided that I would try and establish small blues in the garden. There is a colony up in Kidder's Meadow, and you can find them in Chantry Hill. They're not common. So although Storrington is on Wilden green sand, so there's no chalk at all, and kidney vetch is very much a chalk-loving plant. But I can grow it on sand. It does, as I've written on this slide, it does require a short sward and doesn't cope very well with the competition from other plants. So having established lots of kidney vetch in the garden, in 2021, I recorded 5 different female small blues. And last year, I recorded my first ever male. And I ended up with a peak daily count of about 10 territorial males, so I was a very happy man. So this is a territorial male with the fairy dust. This one's perched on red campion. This one is just feeding on kidney vetch. I've included this photograph just to, again, to show off the beauty of kidney vetch. It's a lovely plant. And the bumblebees absolutely love it. Female small blue on meadow vetchling. Another one on bird's foot trefoil, feeding. And one egg laying. If you've not watched them, it's worthwhile. They what they do is they fly to the flower head and nestle on top, and then they wriggle around a bit, and then they insert their abdomen into the flower head, and just before they release the egg, they give a final thrust, and you can see well, you can't see the egg, but you can see how the abdomen is very elongated. So they're determined to deposit the egg as low as possible or as deep as possible into the flower head. Grizzled skipper, bird's foot. The same insect, but on a different view. They're not common where I live. I can do a survey on Chantry Hill and count 80 dingy skippers, but maybe only 4 grizzled skippers. And the reason for that is that the local downs are lightly grazed, and the sward is quite high, quite tall. Locally, the downs are managed for Duke of Burgundy. The food plants for this butterfly are largely wild strawberry and creeping cinquefoil, and they do need very short sward if they're going to do well. But I do see them. This, however, is a very common butterfly locally. On Chantry Hill, it's a dark green fritillary. On Chantry Hill, I can count up to 200 in a day. So they can be very, very common. I see the males quite often in the garden. I don't often see the females. And this is the only time I've managed to photograph one. As you can see, I deliberately didn't enlarge this photograph. I could have done, but I just wanted to show the flower heads, the jungle of the wildflower meadow. White Admiral, this was my 36th species. So this one appeared in 2021. My 37th species was a silver spotted skipper, but unfortunately I didn't have my camera with me when I saw it, and it didn't stay around for a photograph. I saw that one last year. Painted lady on Field scabious. This photograph was taken in late July, and it's in such good born, but not in my garden. Another painted lady, this one on Remarkably. A rather unusual photograph of a purple hair streak on cow parsley. I have one fairly large oak in the garden. It's about 30 years old, and they certainly visit that oak. I wouldn't say it's necessarily colonized, but they certainly visit. And a purple hair streak feeding on honeydew. Of course, they feed on honeydew, but it's usually high up in a canopy. But this one was more obliging and was feeding on the honeydew of blackthorn. Brown hair streak on Remarkably. If you have brown hair streak in your area, it's definitely worthwhile having a few clumps of Remarkably, because it's pretty much guaranteed to draw them in. Whenever I see them in the garden, which I see them often, it's always the Remarkably that they turn to. A male with open wings. It took me 50 minutes of patience to achieve this photograph, so not unnaturally, I was rather pleased with the result. I remember at the time there was a game of tennis, and there were 2 sets were completed before it opened its wings. But I got there in the end. This one's a nice one. So this is an aberrant brown hair streak, and appeared in my garden in early August 2019. I realized it was an aberrant, and I shared the pictures with the county recorder, and in turn we then sent it off to a national authority on aberrants, and he declared that, as far as he was concerned, this aberrant had never been seen in the UK in the wild before. And he also was very complimentary. He said it was the nicest aberrant he'd seen for years. So that was nice. It was quite amusing when I took this photograph, because I couldn't get very close to it. So I was on a step ladder, and with my camera was about 3 foot in front of my eyes, and I was trying to look through the viewfinder, but I got really lucky because I happened to take this photograph. So in the end, I got there, but I was standing on the stepladder next to the pond. I mean, how crazy is that? And 1 egg laying. My record for the garden is 84 brown hair streak eggs in just 1 season, 1 winter. Speckled wood feeding on Remarkably. Speckled wood feeding on honeydew, which I've never seen before. I've only ever seen on this one occasion. When the butterfly flew away, I inspected this is a hawthorn leaf. I inspected it, and sure enough, there was green aphids being attended by black ants. Red Admiral on Buddleia. Red Admiral on the Michaelmas daisy. Male silver-wash fritillary on Remarkably. I see 3 or 4 every summer, sometimes more, but they rarely seem to stop. They either fly through, or if they do stop and feed, they feed for 10 seconds, then off they go. So this photograph I took in 2013. I mean, I haven't managed a better one since. Brimstone on Bethany. Bethany is a lovely plant and grows very well in sandy soil. Bethany on Everlasting Pea. And egg laying on Alder Buckthorn. Right. So I've got 6 minutes to show you a few more photographs of other insects. So in 2022, I expanded my recording and started to photograph hoverflies, solitary bees, and solitary wasps. And as you can see from this slide, there are plenty in my garden. Far more, I have to say, than I realized were going to be there. So very speedily. So I'm going to show you some large hoverflies. So this is Bomberlands, which is Volucella bomberlands, which is a bumblebee mimic. This is another big one feeding on dogwood. So this is Pelusens. This is Volucella zonaria, which is a worker hornet mimic. You usually see them on Buddleia, but this one is on Devil's Spit scabious. And it's very much easier to photograph them on Devil's Spit scabious than it is on Buddleia. It's a huge, huge insect. And this is another mimic. This is the wasp mimic. So this is Volucella inanis, again on Devil's Spit. If you're keen on insects, do plant some Devil's Spit scabious, because it sure brings in the insects. This is an interesting one. So a mating pair of Cryorhina beverina. Its other name is dimorphic bearfly, which I think describes it rather nicely. And this is another hoverfly, which is a bumblebee mimic. My throper, Florea, you can see is just laid an egg. And for Batman fans, you need to really get behind, directly above it rather. So you can see the markings here. So this is the Batman logo. So if you're not quite sure whether it's Myothropa florea, then look for the Batman logo. Aristalis horticula, which is one of the drone flies, but one of the more interesting ones. This is one of the meadow hoverflies, Spherophoria interrupta, on Gemona speedwell. And they tend to nip about a bit, so they're quite difficult to photograph, and I just got very lucky on this occasion. Now I'm going onto other insects. So, and this is a rarity, or at least it is in Sussex. So this is a downland bit of bee fly. When it turned up last year, I didn't know what it was immediately, but eventually, after about 45 minutes of going through the books, I eventually found out what it was. And so when I checked, there'd been about 12 or 13 records in Sussex, but this was the only second time that had been seen or recorded away from downland. The other location is Knepp, and I believe that they bred in Knepp this year. So so maybe we'll be seeing this more often, but that's a rarity. There's a robber fly, and you see it's piercing the hapless victim with neurotoxins. It's a kite-tailed robber fly. This is a sharp-tailed bee. The sharp tails are the females, but the males have these characteristic 3 prongs. So this is a kleptoparasite of a solitary bee. But again, feeding on devil's spit scabious, it really does draw them in. This is a European bee wharf. Don't they have lovely names? So this is a predator of honeybees, and a single bee wharf can dispatch 100 honeybees in a season. So they sting them and paralyze them, and then take them back to their nest burrows, and they can kill. Well, they don't kill them; they paralyze them. They can they dispatch 100 honeybees in a single season. In terms of photography, one of my favorites, I mean, 2 reasons. This is a wasted bee grabber, which is a thick-headed fly. So this, I just love the flower head of devil's spit scabious. I mean, it's very, very pretty. And I like this insect because it reminds me of a miniature scorpion. So that's a wasted bee grabber. The more you look in your garden, the more you find. And I did plenty of looking. So this is aptly named. This is green-eyed flower bean, which makes a very, very loud noise. You hear them before you see them. Dark edge bee fly. This is about 4 inches off the deck. So the only I was very lucky here because I've got a patch of lesser celandine on a bank by the driveway. So this was now 4.5 feet up, as opposed to being 4 inches off the deck. Look at the length of this proboscis is, and look at the length of these legs as well. Extraordinary. A crab spider with a green bottle in its grasp. A hornet, very non-aggressive hornet, allowed me to get within 15 inches. Nemada flava, which is a solitary bee. It's a kleptoparasite of the chocolate mining bee. This is a patchwork leaf cutter on Greater celandine. This is a chocolate mining bee. And a real cutie to finish. So this is a male ivy bee on mint, and it's it was fascinating to see it. It seems to be watching this little flower beetle, and I'm not quite sure whether it's looking at it and think, well, I wonder what you taste like, or whether it's worried. But whatever it was doing, it kept very still and allowed me to photograph it. So well done, you. And just to finish, to say, well, thank you for listening. It's a shame that I had a freeze of my PowerPoint, but never mind. Anyway, my very special thanks to Richard Stevens for his guidance and endless patience. And without his help, I don't think this presentation would have been possible. Okay, back to Simon.